In this lecture, we will see how to create IAM policies with Terraform and attach it to a user. Alright, so we have successfully created an IAM user called Lucy. But as we learned in the introduction to the IAM lecture, all users start with the least privilege in AWS. Lucy does not have any permissions at this point in time. To add more permissions, we have to attach IAM policies to this user. In the IAM section, we saw that permissions are assigned by the means of a policy document which is in a JSON format. A simple example for an admin access policy looks like this. To add permissions, first let's create an IAM policy using Terraform by making use of the AWS IAM policy resource type. If we look up the argument reference for this resource, we can see that the only mandatory argument needed is the policy document in a JSON format. Let's first add this resource to our Terraform configuration file. Let's name it admin users. But how do we add a policy document here? Well, there are multiple ways to do it. The first way is to provide the complete JSON document as the value to the policy argument. But how do we specify the entire JSON file here? The easiest way is to make use of something called as a here document or a here doc, which is commonly used in command line scripting languages such as Bash shell script that allows us to pass in multiple lines into a command. The command in our specific case is the policy argument into which we want to pass in multiple lines of the JSON document. Following this is the redirection symbol, which is the double left arrows or the double lesser than symbol, and after this is a delimiter. The delimiter can be any string, but the most commonly used string is EOF, which stands for end of file. We can again make use of the same delimiter, which is EOF, to close the file. Between the delimiters, we can pass in any number of lines that we want to pass into the command. In our example, this is the entire JSON document. So we move the entire JSON file containing the policy document between the delimiters like this. Alright, so we have successfully created the IAM policy resource, but it's not attached to a user at this point in time. To attach it, let's make use of another resource block of type AWS IAM user policy attachment. This resource expects the username to attach the policy to and the policy ARN, which is an attribute exported by the AWS IAM policy resource. The main.tf file can now be modified like this. The user argument points to the AWS IAM user resource and the policy ARN points to the AWS IAM policy resource. We have seen this format earlier when we discussed about resource dependencies and reference expressions in Terraform. And with that, our configuration is now complete. We can now run Terraform plan and then apply, and the IAM policy should be attached to the user, giving her complete administrative access to the AWS account. Before we move on, let's look at another way to specify the policy argument when creating an IAM policy resource. Instead of specifying the complete JSON file within the main.tf file, we can make use of a JSON file that can be stored within the configuration directory and be read within the resource block. For this, let's first create a file called adminpolicy.json in the same directory as the main.tf file. We then move the policy document into this file. Once this is done, to load the policy into the policy section, we make use of a file function and pass in the name of the file containing the policy enclosed within brackets. The file function reads the file and returns the contents of it. As a result, we no longer need EOF, which is the delimiters or the here doc syntax that we have used in the previous example. Once this change has been made, the rest of the resources can be created just like we saw in the previous example. That's it for this lecture. Let's head over to the hands-on labs and practice working with IAM using Terraform.